Does sin cause disease? We're going to talk about that and other things today on Wake Up to the Bible. My dad's always like, what are you doing? I'm Daniel Kaplan. I'm here with my father, Dr. Kaplan. We're reading through Genesis through Deuteronomy over the course of this year, a little bit every day. Today we're reading Exodus 14:26 through Exodus 15:26. And I'll be reading from the Robert Alter translation, and then we will be discussing what we have read. Let's get started. And the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea, that the waters go back over the Egyptians, over their chariots, and over their riders. And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea went back toward morning to its full flow, with the Egyptians fleeing toward it. And the Lord shook out the Egyptians into the sea. And the waters came back and covered the chariots and the riders of all Pharaoh's force who were coming after them in the sea. Not a single one of them remained. And the Israelites went on dry land in the midst of the sea, the waters a wall to them on their right and on their left. And the Lord on that day delivered Israel from the hand of Egypt. And Israel saw Egypt dead on the shore of the sea. And Israel saw the great hand that the Lord had performed against Egypt. And the people feared the Lord, and they trusted in the Lord and in Moses, his servant. Then did Moses sing, and all the Israelites with him, this song to the Lord. And they said, saying, let me sing unto the Lord, for he surged, horse and its rider, he hurled into the sea. My strength and my power is Yah, and he became my deliverance. This is my God, I extol him, God of my fathers, I exalt him. The Lord is a man of war, the Lord is his name. Pharaoh's chariots and his force he pitched into the sea, and the pick of his captains were drowned in the reed sea. The depths did cover them over, down they went in the deep like a stone. Your right hand, O Lord, is mighty in power. Your right hand, O Lord, smashes the enemy. In your great surging you wreck those against you. You send forth your wrath. It consumes them like straw. And with the breath of your nostrils waters heaped up. Streams stood up like a mound. The depths congealed in the heart of the sea. The enemy said, I'll pursue, overtake, divide up the loot. My gullet will fill with them. I'll bear my sword, my hand to spoil them. You blew with your breath, the sea covered them over. They sank like lead in the mighty waters. Who is like you among the gods, O Lord? Who is like you, mighty in holiness, fearsome in praise, worker of wonders? You stretched out your hand, earth swallowed them up. You led forth in your kindness this people that you redeemed. You guided them in your strength to your holy abode. Peoples heard, they quaked, trembling seized Philistia's dwellers. Then were the chieftains of Edom dismayed. The dukes of Moab shuddered, seized them. All the dwellers of Canaan quailed. Terror and fear did fall upon them, as your arm loomed big. They were like a stone. Till your people crossed over, O Lord, the people you made yours crossed over. You'll plant them on the mount of your estate, a firm place for your dwelling you wrought, O Lord. The sanctum, O sovereign, your hands firmly founded. The Lord shall be king for all time. For Pharaoh had come with his chariots and his riders into the sea, and the Lord turned the waters of the sea back upon them. But the Israelites went on dry land in the midst of the sea. And Miriam, the prophetess, Aaron's sister, took the timbrel in her hand, and all the women went out after her with timbrels and dances. And Miriam sang out to them, sing to the Lord, for he has surged, horse and rider he hurled into the sea. And Moses from the Israelites journey onward, and Moses made the Israelites journey onward from the Sea of Reeds, and they went out to the wilderness of Shur. And they went 3 days in the wilderness, and they did not find water. And they came to Marah, and could not drink water from Marah, for it was bitter. Therefore is its name called Marah. And the people murmured against Moses, saying, what shall we drink? And he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree, and he flung it into the water, and the water turned sweet. There did he set him a statute and law, and there did he test him. And he said, if you really heed the voice of the Lord your God, and do what is right in his eyes, and hearken to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, all the sickness that I put upon Egypt I will not put upon you, for I am the Lord your healer. All right, so quite a lot of content in there, mostly, though, a big musical number. This is our first big interruption.
Ladonai
Thank you.
Kigoga. All right.
Yeah, yes, yeah, exactly. But It's the first one, right? This is the first one we've come across, which is this big chunk of
Well, otherwise
song.
the little ditty that Lamech sings, early in Genesis there,
Right,
just a
right.
couple of lines.
Just a couple lines though.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the first like big thing, and it just kind of comes in all of a sudden. But it makes sense, It's not like all of a sudden like you wouldn't understand why this would be such a dramatic moment. They tell you in theater the right time to have a musical number is when somebody is so overcome by emotion that the only thing they could do is sing about it, and essentially the Bible does fit that pattern. So,
Once again, Robert Alter does a really great job with translating it. It says it's in the singular. Moses sang, and the children of Israel. That's how he translates it.
uh-huh.
Moses sang, and the children of Israel with him. He says, right. It's a well done translation there. Um,
Yes. Then did Moses sing and all the Israelites with him? That's what you mean?
yeah, I would like to go back to a problematic verse
Uh-huh.
as this episode unwinds here.
Yes.
Um, Moses says to them, God will fight for you.
Yeah.
And then the Eternal says to Moses, "Why do you cry to me? Tell the children of Israel to go
Yeah.
forward." So it seems like even Moses, after giving this very eloquent statement, he's now not quite maybe 100% himself.
Mm-hmm.
He's still praying when God says, "The time has come now to act." It's very interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
I maybe I'm spinning it incorrectly, but it is something to think about how this.
Oh, you think
Yeah,
the why do you cry out to me? The you is talking to Moses and not the Israelites?
yeah, pretty well. Yeah, it's
Because it
pretty.
says the Lord said to Moses, "Why do you cry out to me?"
Yeah, that's
He's
to
but then
Moses.
he says, "Speak to the Israelites." You don't think that I thought of the you as why are the Israelites crying out to me?
All
He's
right.
saying
Well,
that to
my
Moses.
my phone
To
isn't cooperating to go back to the Hebrew. Go to the Old King James, and you'll see it there.
what?
Go to Exodus 15 in the Old King James, because
Oh,
I'm
because it'll be a singular
yeah,
you.
it'll be a singular. Go check. I'm pretty. It is singular, but my phone isn't cooperating to give me a Hebrew Bible. But if you go to the Old King James, it'll say, "Why dost thou cry out?" Right?
Yeah,
It,
yeah,
it's it's talking to Moses,
yeah.
and
Well,
that's why it's kind of
yeah.
interesting.
Robert Alter says
Aha,
that
a
the
comment.
least strange solution is that of Abraham Ezra, who argues that since
Yeah.
Moses is the spokesman of the people, if the people cry out, God can readily attribute the crying out to Moses. So apparently, it's the same spin as I had.
Okay, so
That he's just speaking collectively.
yeah, you're the leader, so why do you cry out to me? Is in the sense of he's representing the whole nation. You looking at the nation as one. That happens sometimes in the Bible where Israel is described as one.
Right.
Okay, so it's like kind of poetic in
Yeah.
the sense, why do you Israel cry out to me?
Mm-hmm.
All right, that's very good. That was Ibn Ezra. He was quoting a famous
Yeah.
medieval commentator, evidently.
Yes.
All right.
Yep. So yes. And Sean, I agree with you. Shout out to My Soul Among Lions for their excellent
Mm,
rendition of Exodus 15. It
really,
is a great version.
okay, I
We
will.
use it on the seventh day of unleavened bread in our celebrations because we like to commemorate this event. We also have singing stories was very important to ancient culture. Yes, it's actually important to modern culture. If you think of
Battle of
the
New Orleans.
no,
In
not only
1814, we took a little trip.
I
Yeah,
mean, yes,
right.
but even not even so on the nose as that. Like when we are singing about experience and culture, and it has an impact, right? You can clearly see it. It not only cements things that we think of as human values, but then it also can push values and often not in the best direction because artists are generally not the most balanced of people. And I can say that because I feel like I'm a pretty artistic person, so I feel like I'm entitled to
I think
criticize in that way.
Prince of Egypt does a good job with this. If the song there.
Yes,
Uh,
the little portion with Hebrew and when you believe. Um, Now, one thing that's interesting about this song is this is a very different sort of song than typically you might typically sing nowadays because I feel like people are a little askew in terms of what they think worship music should sound like.
right.
Because if you look at the framework it is very aggressive. It is violent. It is praising punishment. It's harsh.
Sometimes you should hear Theodore Bickel doing a
You
bit
know,
doing a bit of this in Hebrew. You get a different
yeah, it's very
different spin than what modern Protestantism would.
right, and it puts God in a fear context, not he's my buddy context, which is often how worship music tends to do it. Worship
Mhm.
music tends to personify God down more to our level, to more where he's like your friend, which I'm not saying that's necessarily wrong, but framework wise, this is just very different. This is actually the opposite. It's trying to distance yourself. It's trying to show your insignificance in comparison to God's power. It's intimidating. It's different, you know.
This
And,
this
and I don't mean distance in terms of his involvement. I don't mean like from a distance.
no
I mean
no
like his involvement is right here in front of your face. I'm just talking about distance in terms of what you are as an entity versus what he is as an
oh, oh.
entity. I just want to be clear about that.
This passage is very important in Jewish liturgy
Yes.
all through the year, and but on the Sabbath when this is read, they call that Shabbat Shirah,
Hmm.
the Sabbath of song. And it's interesting also that you have Moses and the children of Israel, but then you have Miriam leading the women in song. That you read that already, right?
Yes.
That she has some kind of tambourine, or says here timbrel in my chant. What does he say? Tambourine, timbrel.
Timbrel.
Yeah, and she's also leading the women in song.
I love Sean. No chance of the horse and rider who's been thrown into the sea in the modern church being sung. Unfortunately, for a lot of them, that is correct.
Miriam, though, was a prophetess here, and that's important to know. I have a talk on
Hmm.
prophetesses that's still out there.
It's a
Hopefully,
popular one
hopefully
too.
getting Daniel's graphics had a lot to do with the popularity of it,
Yeah.
I suppose.
Yeah. Now here's a question about Miriam because you said prophetess. It does just kind of throw that out there. This is not something we've ever gotten up to this point.
Yeah,
Um, but what specifically does it even mean in this context? Because we don't ever, generally, when you hear prophet, you think of somebody who has divine insight and can tell you about the future or something specific to God that you would not know otherwise. But we don't really ever see that exemplified in anything that Miriam does.
she watches over the baby as a child,
Right, and then
and
she steps forward in boldness to say, "Oh, I know somebody who can nurse the child," so that's
yeah,
certainly great.
right,
And then here she's stepping forward in boldness to praise God and to declare what
right.
happened, but it's nothing that nobody couldn't observe otherwise.
Well, later on, she gets in trouble too.
Hmm.
In Numbers, the 12th chapter. But it's interesting. Should
It just
the
seems like it's giving us more information than it's going to really clarify.
the prophetesses in the Old Testament were kind of like special advisors, to the ruler. And in her case, God may have used her to advise Moses in certain ways that we don't have recorded.
Right.
Because later, I think you'll see that the prophetess in the Old Testament is often, you know, one who in the New Testament too, for that matter, the prophetesses are there to advise the apostles, to give them special counsel.
Hmm. But again, I mean, wouldn't you assume that that counsel might include divine information that
Right?
one
Yeah.
wouldn't surmise otherwise?
Yeah. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And then it's just interesting that we don't actually get to see that.
Yes. Yeah.
It just
Right.
mentions it,
Right.
and we have no idea what that meant.
Right. Yeah.
You know, during this time, you have no idea what Miriam was able to advise anybody about.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. Right.
Specifically in this situation, you have her dealing with women too, which you know may not be as politically correct to think about in terms of the segmenting, but if we just want to go with what the text says, it says that in this situation she came and she led the women in a specific way. You know, if we just go with what the text says,
Right. Yeah.
it does not have her leading a mixed group.
Right.
So
Yeah.
again, I'm just going with what the text says. I'm
Now,
not saying she didn't do that,
now
except that the text doesn't say she did that.
there's an interesting Jewish tradition about the first verse here.
Uh-huh.
It's in a very peculiar tense.
Which one? Then did Moses sing?
Right. It looks like it says Moses will sing. So the Jews take this as an implication of the resurrection.
Huh.
And fascinatingly, in
Revelation does that.
Revelation
Yeah.
15, you see there the saints
Yeah.
singing the song of Moses.
That's cool.
And so to me, John was basing, John's vision was in effect related to that Jewish tradition
Yeah.
that this verse implies a resurrection. The only other place this tense is used is in an interesting place in First Kings, where there the wisdom of Solomon is being talked about. And again, my phone isn't cooperating.
Well, while you're looking that up,
Yeah, okay, you can
I'll
keep.
make another comment. This
All
came
right,
from Robert Alter, and this is
all
a
right.
very a good comment, and that is generally at the conclusion of a narrative segment of the Bible, there is poetry involved. And so one could look at this. I know you had mentioned some people say, really, the Bible begins with, Exodus. It begins with, this is the start, right? Essentially, this is kind of the start of God's people and that direct salvation intervention in many ways. A little nebulous, but but uh, in this specific sort of way, the community involvement and the really, there's a reason why I think even though commandments were known, that we're getting the solidification at this time. So this is really the beginning of something, right? So this is really the conclusion of all of that to lead up to what's going to become Mount Sinai and
Yeah,
the
that's
church and all
that's
of that.
that's interesting because I often tell people that the Bible is organized in a fivefold pattern, but the book of Genesis kind of overlaps through the 15th chapter of Exodus,
Hmm.
and it's in the 16th chapter you have more now the second part of the
Right.
Pentateuch where you're dealing with Pentecost related material.
Hmm.
The first part is dealing with the unleavened bread material,
Right.
and then the seventh day of unleavened bread probably is Exodus 15. Beginning on the 16th chapter, they're moving towards Sinai,
Right.
and you're into more of the Pentecost related material.
Hmm.
Yeah, so that I'm glad my Daniel
The
brought that out.
seventh day, right?
Of unleavened bread will be the 15th
Yeah.
of Exodus
Exodus 15.
15. But then when you get to
Yeah.
Exodus 16, you're
Yeah.
moving towards Sinai then,
Right. You're counting towards
and
Pentecost.
you,
I mean,
right,
you probably already started the count, but you're heading that
right.
direction.
I wanted to mention the other time that text occurs could also imply a resurrection. Interestingly, it has to do with now two verse First Kings 3:16. Now two women who were harlots came to the king and stood before him. And if you want to take this as implying a resurrection, two women who are harlots in Ezekiel 23, Israel and Judah are pictured as harlots, and the king here could be God. So this could be implying a future resurrection to judgment of Israel before God. I mean, it's talking about Solomon here, but I'm just saying it's just kind of interesting. This is the only other time that particular tense I think could be found, which looks like a future, but it's being used as past. And according to Moshe Greenberg, I think it goes back to the Akkadian language,
Mm,
an ancient Semitic language that might have been the language of Abraham.
gotcha.
They've discovered that tense in poetry in the Akkadian language. So that's anyway. Robert Alter may or may not comment on that.
He does not in this
Okay.
situation. I don't know about First Kings, but
Yeah.
he
Okay.
does
Just
not.
want to bring
Yeah,
that
no,
up.
that's really interesting that it has that
Right.
subtlety
I
to it.
think so.
Yeah. So getting back to the opening prompt when we were talking about um, uh, illness, the end of this is a rather interesting statement because what God says is if you really heed the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right in his commands and hearken to his commands and keep all his statutes, all the sickness that I put upon Egypt I will not put upon you, for I am the Lord your healer. Now, why I find this so fascinating is that later we will have accounts of illness not being related to sinful behavior, right? So this is not the full picture. However, it's a little bit confusing because if the idea is that if you're a commandment keeping person, you would avoid illness, then essentially you can ascribe all illness to being sinful, but then later you're told you can't do that.
Right.
So it
Right.
feels a little bit like a paradox.
Well, I think that sickness can be brought about by sin, but it is not always the case.
Hmm.
So so it's not for us to judge, but it
Right.
can be the case because James 5 talks about that too.
Right.
That
Well,
it can be healed and also forgiven of sins that that may be involved. As you look at James 5
yeah.
around verse 14.
Right.
But
I do have an explanation though, but a lot of people wouldn't like it.
I'd also like to say that these diseases, there were probably particular diseases in Egypt that might have followed them that he lifted from them. Just
Mm.
diseases that may be more a part of the
I was talking about like the plagues, essentially.
yeah, and certain things that relate to the environment of that nation that could have been brought over to Israel, but he said no, you don't have to have them.
Hmm.
It may not be everything that could go wrong, but certain things that were very much associated with living in Egypt.
Yeah. My thought is that the key here is where he says, "I will not put upon you," and that would imply that God does not put illness on people except as a punishment for something. However, that
Yeah,
implies that illness can happen apart from God, which
yeah,
really ruffles some feathers. But
oh yeah, but
I,
time and chance, As,
well, no, but you can't believe that.
what do you mean? Ecclesiastes says time and chance happens to everybody. 9:11 of Ecclesiastes.
Well, no, it doesn't have to. There's other ways of interpreting that verse. There's other renderings of it, because Calvinists have to deal with that verse, and they have ways. But if
Um,
everything is predestined, if you believe in what is it, providence, meticulous providence, everything is from God, and so every illness is from God. And I would say no,
no, no.
but that's not very popular. People like to be like, "Oh, you're suffering. Well, God is giving you the suffering so that you can learn a lesson or something like that." And that's a way that they can narratively frame their way of going through. Because the alternative explanation is God is kind of allowing things to happen that He does not particularly want or is not particularly involved with, and it's more hands off, and people find that to be problematically deist. So
There's a balance in between.
there is a balance in between, and I think something like this, uh, the implication to me, and again, if you disagree, comment below. The implication to me on this is that there can be sickness that does not come from God, and therefore that is why we cannot say, oh, because you're sick it's because of your sin, because we don't even know if it was just part of a process that is just in motion.
Well, Jesus said these people had an accident and died, and they were no worse than anybody else in the town.
Yeah.
People, and other people were martyred,
Yeah.
right? And
But a
except
lot of people would say that that still was part of the divine plan. It's just part of the divine plan is bad things happen to people for not punishment reasons.
anyway, what's also important is that he says
Sean triggered. I'm
when
sorry. Okay.
but he also says I am the eternal who heals you. He is our Ophe.
Mm-hmm.
He is our ultimate physician. So
Yes.
God does heal, and so he is a healer, and so obviously prayer for the sick is appropriate,
Right.
there are many people who probably feel that in fact they were healed
Sure.
supernaturally, even though they may have obviously taken steps, on the human level, but
Mm-hmm.
they would also feel that God was involved in their healing,
The fascinating
and
thing,
there
though,
are
about
miraculous healings
right,
that do happen.
the fascinating thing about this, though, is the connection between healing and keeping of the law, which usually is not the way people frame it. They frame it as faith or belief, not
Yeah,
obedience, which is interesting. How, and I'm not saying there's not any verses that you can do that. Just saying this specific verse connects commandment keeping and healing. So you have to
yeah,
factor that as well.
yeah,
Something to keep in mind.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
You could also take this when it says the sickness I put upon Egypt. I mean, you can take that as much more theological and less like cancer or something. You can take when it says, I'm the healer, and connecting it to the commandments, it could have a lot more to do with mindset, theological beliefs, the way you navigate the world, because
That would
to
be
have
more
a
of a myth.
perverted sense of reality is an illness in of itself.
That's more of a midrash on it. I think, yeah,
I'm just trying to give
mm,
different options
yeah,
here for
right.
people.
Right. I
You're
mean, he says it in the context of something quite physical,
yes, you're right.
bitter waters that they couldn't drink.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
that's the thing too with the bitterness of it. I'm guessing the idea is that it wasn't just unappetizing; it actually was not,
yeah, right.
not um potable. What is it?
Mm,
Potable?
mm,
Like it's unsanitary or something. Um, because it says they could not drink it, and so it doesn't seem like it's just something they didn't want to. But
by the way, Jesus Christ, in one of the verses in the New Testament, died on a tree. In effect, the crucifix,
oh yeah, that's
the
true.
execution stake, the
Yeah,
cross. He died on a tree, and here a tree is used to sweeten the waters and make. In other words, the
right,
tree brings them life,
right.
and
Now,
so
is it now another thing to keep in mind too is I think we have to be careful not to lump everything into one bucket because here where it says they came and they couldn't drink it because it was bitter, and then they said, well, what shall we drink and everything, and God's reaction is not that negative in this
no,
situation because I think he set this up so that he could give this lesson. I
right,
think the negative is when it says the people murmured against Moses because obviously it's not his fault, and he's going to talk about that later. Because of course it's not Moses' fault. What did Moses do? So why should they murmur against Moses? So that's negative. But the question of, well, what are we supposed to do? Don't we need water? I don't think that does not seem to be an issue to God that somebody is um, bringing that up. Later you'll see the example of testing God and it's negative, but this does not seem to be.
this is like the first stage.
This is getting in that it's moving
Getting
in a
there.
bad direction, but
Yeah,
it's not that bad yet.
yeah, it's getting there, but not quite as bad as it becomes.
Right.
Right,
Again, I'm
right,
just trying to give him some credit.
right,
It's.
right.
I think. My point is, I don't think it's a bad thing that they asked, "What are we supposed to drink?" I think the negative I get out of this is more that they're talking against Moses
Right, yeah.
rather than just asking the question because it is a logical question.
It reminds me of that concept in America. What have you done for me lately?
Right.
I mean, look at all that happened just recently.
Yeah.
Uh,
Exactly. All right. So anyway, you want to move on?
okay, let's move
Let's
on.
move on. It's a great year to read the law. So please like, subscribe, hit the bell, and we'll read the law together.